All right, let's do this. Good afternoon and welcome to the City Club of Eugene's September 19th, 2025 program, City of Eugene's Budget Process. My name is Thomas Hura. I serve as president of the City Club, and I'm pleased to welcome you to another of the many forums we've held since 1990 in the name of our mission to build community vision through open inquiry. City Club is lucky to be a trusted, open, and independent voice for Eugene area community members to be heard. And as a lifelong Eugenian, I dare say the community is lucky to have the City Club and to hear from our program guests and questions from the audience, whether here in the beautiful Wow Hall, online, or over the radio. We believe these kinds of gatherings around critical community topics strengthen our understanding of one another and ultimately our ability to support the community building work in so many sectors of Eugene. In today's fractured information landscape, we want to be a place where you can participate in unearthing, disseminating, and sharing relevant information in conversation together. We would love for you to browse our past programs at cityclubofelugene.org or our YouTube or Facebook. Do consider becoming a member if you'd like to support our work as the only city club in Oregon that meets weekly. There are many ways to support and collaborate with us, and I'd like to thank our Diamond and Platinum community sponsors. The University of Oregon has helped Oregonians question critically, think logically, reason effectively, communicate clearly, act creatively, and live ethically since 1876. Get more information at uoregon.edu. Lane Community College transforms lives through learning. LCC provides comprehensive, accessible, high-quality educational opportunities that promote student success. For more information, visit lanecc.edu. Thank you to the City of Eugene and to Lane County for their support as well, and a special acknowledgement of our most recent Sapphire sponsor, Summit Bank. We're proud to do our banking at Summit, and we're grateful for the contributions of Summit's employees to our club and community. A quick reminder, please silence all cell phones and devices in the hall. And with that, to introduce three bright business and finance-focused minds in our community, I proudly turn the mic over to the coordinator of today's program, Sandra Bishop.
Thank you. Good afternoon. As Thomas said, Sandra Bishop, longtime City Club member, and really glad to be able to put together the program we have today on the budget process, City of Eugene budget process. So Eugene is not alone in having challenges around budgeting and coming up with enough revenue to support the kind of services that people want. Multnomah County, last time I checked, was looking. In June, they were looking at a over $77 million budget gap. University of Oregon, who knows what the numbers are? They're touting it as 2.5% cut in their budget. And Springfield put together recently a fiscal sustainability task force, which in Springfield, over 9 weeks, they met and came up with 9 key recommendations, mostly on priorities. So be interesting to talk with our speakers today and see what Eugene's doing. Eugene has had some challenges in the process this year. So just to give you a brief recap, in February, the City Council adopted a fire service fee to help narrow what was then an $11.5 million gap in the city budget. By April, a referendum petition spearheaded by the Eugene Chamber of Commerce and citizens and business people gathered more than 8,400 signatures to put the proposed fire fee on the ballot. They needed 6,000 signatures. In May, the City Council adopted an 18% increase in the stormwater fee, purportedly to replace the fire service fee. And then it was finally in June 23rd that the city adopted the budget for fiscal year 25-27. And it wasn't until July 14th that the City Council repealed the fire fee. So here we are today with a budget, and we'll hear from some folks that have had many years of experience in the budget process in Eugene. First, we'll hear from Ty Pruce Zimmerman. Ty is has just announced that he's actually running for city council. When we put the program together, that hadn't happened yet. But Ty is coming off of seven years on the budget committee, and he was for the last 4, was chair of the budget committee. And then next we'll hear from Brittany Quick-Warner, who's the president and CEO of the Eugene Chamber. Brittany, at age 30, became the chamber CEO, one of the youngest and one of the women who was up and coming in Eugene. And then we have Mike Clark, Eugene City Councilor. Mike is a senior counselor. No, that's not right. Mike's been on the council for a very long time. Mike is actually, Mike's been on the council for about almost 20 years now. And I note that he's had some very good economic proposals in the past. One was to buy the old EWIB building for the city council, city hall. And that only took 10 years. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Ty. And then, and just to say, after the speakers have let us know about the budget process, we'll have a lot of time for Q&A as well. So thank you. Ty?
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having us here today. My name is Ty Pruce Zimmerman. I love our community here in Eugene, and I volunteer basically anywhere I can. A few examples: I'm co-chair of the Active Bethel Community Neighborhood Association. I'm on the Square One Villages Finance Committee. I'm on a couple nonprofit boards. My son just started kindergarten a couple weeks, so now I'm on the PTO. And yes, last week I also filed to run for city council. But the reason I'm here today is those 7 years of experience on the City Budget Committee, and last 4 as chair, like Sandra said. And I'm excited to have that chance to talk about that experience, explain what I can about how our budget comes to be, how we approached this year's particularly challenging budget, and answer any questions that all of you might have. First things first, the budget process is monumental. This most recent budget that we passed ultimately in the June of 2025, which will be in place through June of 2027, was being worked on as early as the fall of 2023. By the time a proposed budget comes to the budget committee and the community at large starts to hear about it, it starts showing up in the press, city staffers at all levels and across all departments have already put in an extraordinary amount of work to get us to that point. Once the city manager does bring that proposed budget to our budget committee, that's where the part that I'm familiar with starts. And so at the most basic level, the committee consists of all 8 city councilors as well as 8 citizen members who are appointed by council. And we have a series of meetings. First we hear the proposed budget, then we have opportunities to ask whatever questions come to our minds, get presentations from staff, listen to public comment, and our ultimate charge at the committee level is to recommend a budget to council. We do have the opportunity to amend the proposed budget as we see fit before we send it to council. We also have the option to make other procedural motions about things that should be done. Now, in most of the time that I've been on the committee, public comment was pretty minimal. That was usually the smallest piece. I was used to, through many years, especially when we were on Zoom, seeing maybe a few people show up at an individual meeting. I see a couple of you in the audience today. Shocking, there's a crossover. But this year, that was different because, of course, of the huge budget deficit that we knew we were facing and the fact that the proposed budget included major cuts to some public-facing services and programs that brought the community out. Before I say more about that, I want to go back and make it clear that that deficit was not a surprise that came out of the blue when this budget was proposed. We knew it was coming well in advance. We had discussed it 2 years earlier in the budget process for the 23-25 budget, and it's not an anomaly. 16 of the last 19 city budgets in Eugene have been cut budgets. For decades, we've been in this position where the cost of providing the same services in the same way, year over year, is just consistently increasing faster than our revenues are. So almost every budget, we have a gap that we have to fill somehow. We can either cut service, find new ways to deliver the same services more efficiently, or find a way to raise revenue. Those are the only three mathematical options that can close that gap. Now, the cost increases have a multitude of drivers. Some of it is PERS, some of it, in this most recent budget, inflation, which had spiked, played a big role. But that can come from a variety of places. The limits on revenue growth are due mostly to ballot measures 5 and 50, which were passed in the 1990s. So those measures placed a variety of limitations on property taxes in the state of Oregon. And property taxes are the primary source of revenue for the city's general fund, which is the part of the budget we have discretionary control over. I don't want to get too far into the weeds on 5 and 50. That's not really what we're here for tonight. That would be a great topic for a full forum. Program committee, strongly recommend. But I do want to say that there's a little bit of it that I think a lot of folks aren't aware of. The well-known part of what those measures did is put a 3% cap on how much property taxes can rise year over year. That part is popular, it's a reasonable protection against runaway tax increases. Then there are other aspects that where tax assessments don't reset when properties are sold. Newly built properties come onto the tax rolls at sometimes as little as 40% of their initial market value. These are the other behind-the-scenes exacerbating provisions that really create the budget problems that we've been seeing statewide. Everyone's dealing with this. Eugene's not alone in having these regular cut budgets. You're seeing it in nearly every major city in Oregon, nearly every county, nearly every school district. And so to segue back to today's topic from that, what I'll say is that most of what I know about those sort of hidden details of 5 and 50, I learned this year at the Budget Committee. There was a really great presentation for anyone who's interested at our February 12th, 2025 meeting from Maurizio Badalico. So if you want to know more about sort of those hidden details of 5 and 50 in anticipation of a future City Club forum, find that video, February 12th, 2025, City of Eugene Budget Committee, and skip to about the 2-hour, 31-minute timestamp for that presentation. But the long and short of that, to bring it back to topic at hand, is we knew that this year's budget deficit was on the horizon. We weren't caught off guard by it. And in 2023, we weren't prepared as a committee to endorse as extensive cuts as there would be with no new revenue. So we proposed a revenue advisory committee be formed, and it was. And that committee explored dozens of possible new revenue options and brought back to the city council a proposal for a fire service fee. Now, Sandra alluded to a lot of what happened with that. Ultimately, it wasn't included in the proposed budget in April. I think Brittany can give some more detail about how and why all that happened. But without that funding source included, we were facing drastic potential cuts, and the public turned out in droves to tell us how they felt about it. I just want to take this moment to thank each and every person who wrote to us, especially those who came out to testify. That process of hearing one person after another share their personal stories about what our city services meant to them, and with so many of those stories directly echoing my own experiences, I found it an incredibly powerful statement about the strength and beauty of our community. And I deeply hope that going forward, we can see that level of engagement with the budget process become a norm, not an exception, preferably without it being driven by more potential budget cuts. So to wrap up the story, and Sandra, I might need an 8th minute. After extensive efforts and conversations throughout our community about balancing needs and means, I'm going to shout out our mayor here, who did an extraordinary amount of work to bring us to a compromise ultimately. We managed to get to a place where a week before the Budget Committee had to recommend a budget, Council was able to pass the stormwater increase. And so in the end, we did not cut days out of the downtown library schedule. We did not close Amazon Pool or the Sheldon Community Center. We did not end our animal services contract with Green Hill Humane Society. We did not end our neighborhood services program, or at least we didn't this year. We did still end up cutting $6.8 million of less visible line items, the same kind of cuts that we've been making behind the scenes for years as we try desperately not to touch the programs that matter most to people. Things are getting very, very stretched thin behind the scenes, and programs are less and less supported. So if nothing changed in the next 2 years and the next budget's another cut budget, all the same items would probably be back on the chopping block. And I don't say that to sound pessimistic, but just to emphasize that we have a lot of work left in front of us to get to where we need to go. I'm hoping that Brittany and Councilor Clark have enough time to squeeze into their remarks some of the details about new advisory committees and council retreats that are going to get us to where we need to over those next 2 years. We're not just going to ignore that problem. But that is my tip of the iceberg budget summary. There's about a dozen things I spent 30 seconds on that could have each been 15-minute topics. But for now, I'm going to go sit down, give our other panelists a turn, and I look forward to your questions later. Thank you. Brittany.
Thank you, Ty. I agree. It's way too much to fit in 7 minutes, so I don't know if I'll touch on all the things you mentioned, but I'll try. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for the opportunity to join this conversation. My name is Brittany Quickwarner, and I have the honor of serving as the president and CEO at the Eugene Area Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate the opportunity to share our perspective on the city's budget process, and I was specifically asked to share a little bit more about the process around the fire service fee and the decision that we made to ultimately refer that to the ballot. So let me start where I think a lot of us agree, is that Eugene needs reliable, high-quality public services. As partners, many of you know that our chamber has a long history of supporting public funding for essential services. Libraries, parks, schools, arts, public safety. In my 12 years that I've been at the Chamber of Commerce, we've supported every one of those taxes and levies and bonds that have come our way that we've been asked to weigh in on. The school bonds, the park levies, the road bonds. Our opposition to this particular fee was not about the value of those services, and it never was. It was about the process, the structure, and ultimately the long-term sustainability of the specific fee that was proposed that we really feel like we need to dive deeper into as a community. I also want to address, since I have an opportunity, a misconception that I think is often out in the community, and that the Chamber of Commerce is about big business and that we're just kind of made up of big businesses. And it's absolutely not true. Our membership, actually almost 90, maybe a little bit more than 90% of our members are actually small employers, nonprofits, startups, restaurants, makers and family-owned firms. They coach Little League and they serve on boards, and they contribute an enormous amount philanthropically to the organizations across our community. They really care about the services that are in our community. They want safe streets and strong fire and EMS services and vibrant parks and a city that residents can trust. So our goal was never to just say no to a tax or a fee. Our goal was to say, let's do it differently and what we think is maybe in a better way with more transparency and accountability and a plan that the public can really start to believe in. So ultimately, in a little context around the fire service fee, like Ty mentioned, we've known for a while that we have this structural budget deficit, and the Budget Committee has been proposed or has been brought sort of a forecast that shows this deficit for several years. We have, as a community, continued to add to the number of FTE that we have at the City of Eugene, and so while there's some efficiencies in places that cuts were made, we also have been growing as a city organization as well. So when the city passed the fiscal year 23-25 budget, they knew that deficit was there, and ultimately they made a decision to pass the budget knowing that they were going to direct staff to create this revenue committee. When they created this revenue committee, they were specifically charged with just looking for revenue. And from our perspective, that is where I think we wish there would have been a little bit broader charge for that committee, and where there was a missed opportunity. We really think that in order to address the structural deficit, we have to look at both sides of the equation. We've got to look at efficiencies and how we have been providing services in the past and how we might need to do that differently to accommodate, as well as potential revenues going forward. The committee that did that work ultimately brought forward this fire service fee as the proposal, and while a few of the members happened to be chamber members, the chamber actually wasn't involved in that committee formally. We got kind of the information about this fire service fee once that committee was done meeting, and we started raising our concerns right away. We ultimately asked the council to maybe take a different approach to look at prioritization of our services first before we ultimately adopted this fee. We then, when we saw it was going to move forward, asked them, let's just send it to the voters. If we're going to have a permanent fee that's passed, let's give the voters the opportunity to say yes or no to that. Ultimately, council decided on February 10th to go ahead and pass the fire service fee themselves on a 5-3 vote. And after that vote, we did a lot of due diligence, really. We completed a survey from our membership. We did a public opinion poll, really to try to determine where the public was at on this and if they felt like they needed a say in that fee. Ultimately, with that information and a lot of careful consideration, we have, in my time at the Chamber, never done a referendum before. So this is not normal practice for our organization. Our board ultimately decided to initiate that process. In 3 weeks, we went out with the help of signature gatherers, which is completely legal and part of our public process. We collected more than 8,000 signatures from voters saying, we want to have a say in this. And that was ultimately our goal, is to put this on the ballot so the voters could decide about this fee. Why we did that, there was a few initial concerns that we had that we think are still kind of fundamental as we go forward and look at budgeting processes. First is that this was a permanent fee that could rise every single year with council vote at any level. I think that's really a pretty serious decision that our councilors made, and one that I think the public appreciated maybe having a say in. The second is the way that this fee was formatted, being called a fire service fee, we feel like wasn't as transparent as it could have been. We believe that because 80% of the funds that would have been raised for this fee would be backfilling the gap that we had in our budget, and only $2 million new dollars would be going to fire, people were going to assume that this was a $10 million fee that was going to boost our fire services, and that wasn't the case. And so we really felt like the way that this was formatted, it could have been more transparent to the public. And then lastly, we knew that this didn't totally solve our problem, right? So there was still a budget gap that cuts would have to be addressed even after this fee was proposed. And I think that would have been surprising to the public as well. So we really felt like we needed a more comprehensive plan that kind of looked at a lot of different pieces to help the city live within its means and make sure that the community was prioritizing the services that they wanted. So we know that ultimately a stormwater fee was passed. We hoped that the council would take a shorter term look at that alternative kind of temporary fee. Ultimately, it was passed for still a temporary time, but an 18% fee increase. But what it does, and we think in a spirit of community, we want clarity on priorities. We want the community to weigh in and say, maybe we have a limited amount of resources as a community right now, and these are the things that are the most important for us to focus on going forward. But also some creative ways to be doing this differently. This does not automatically mean that we have to stop doing some of the things that our community is used to. We could, and we have several examples that we're excited to kind of share, hopefully at some point, about ways that we could be doing some of these things differently. Having external sources, contracting out more of these services, looking at how other communities are providing resources where we're not cutting back on the actual service, but we might be providing it a little bit differently. We also think the biggest piece of the conversation that has been missing, which is not surprising coming from the CEO of the Chamber of Commerce, is that our city, our county, our state has for many, many years not put a priority focus on expanding the tax base, not increasing the number of dollars that the folks we have here are paying, but expanding the number of people who are paying into this tax base. The way that we do that in this state is by income taxes and property taxes, and in order to drive those up, we've got to have more businesses. We need more jobs. We need to be paying higher wages. And in order to make that happen, we have to focus on it. That doesn't happen accidentally. It has to be a very proactive approach towards growing our tax base in that way. And we implore the city and the community to focus on that more because we really think it can overall support all of these things that our community wants to see. We also know that our nonprofits and our schools and our faith communities are operating on really thin margins. And so while the city has a budget deficit and they might have to raise a tax, that unintentionally impacts all of these other organizations who are also operating on budget deficits. And so we got to figure out how to grow the pie. We can't just keep splitting up amongst different organizations in the community. Really, I want to say thank you to the city and the city council for moving forward in the way that they did with a technical advisory committee. So the chamber has not been a part of putting this committee together. We're kind of sitting right there alongside the rest of the community with our hopes of what we can see come out of this. But we know that the city manager ultimately selected a committee of folks who could bring some technical expertise to that conversation. She outlined at a city council meeting last week what that looked like. But we do believe, and we know that they've been charged to look at both efficiencies and, ways to increase the tax base, potential looking at, maybe some additional fees down the road or taxes down the road, but ultimately making a more holistic kind of approach to that conversation. We also believe that and hope that that's going to be a little bit more transparent, communicative along the way. We know they're meeting for several weeks this fall and doing a lot of deep work in that space. So we know, and ultimately, we're not going to agree on every step, every timeline or tool. It's the beauty of living in a community that we can respectfully disagree on some of the ways these things have been done. But we want to come to the table. We want to be there. We have been, trying for years to get more business voices at the table at the Budget Committee and other places, and we'll continue to try to do that, not to take them over, but to provide alternative perspectives along the way. The Chamber really wants to be a constructive partner in this process. Like I said, we're all community members. We're using these pools and these parks, and we are benefiting from the emergency services that we have. And so this is not about no new taxes. This is about let's just make sure we're doing it as effectively and responsibly as we can, because we know individuals in this community are also facing financial barriers and burdens that they cannot continue to carry on their own. And so going back to the well and asking for more might not be a sustainable way for our community to move forward. So I appreciate the opportunity to weigh in and happy to answer questions later.
Good afternoon. I appreciate the opportunity to be here and to talk with you guys today. My name is Mike Clark, and I am the Eugene City Councilor for Ward 5. We didn't all coordinate exceptionally what we were going to say together, so some of what I was going to say has been covered by my colleagues here. I'll try not to repeat or duplicate, but I will say that as when asked to speak on our budget process, I can say that there are two people in Eugene who've been a part of deliberating more City of Eugene budgets than me, and both of them are in the room. This young lady right here and Councilor Taylor and Councilor Zelenka back here have both been a part of deliberating more budgets than I have, but I don't know that there's anybody else. So done this a couple of times, and my comments today will be my opinions only. I certainly don't speak for the whole council. I believe that we have some very difficult decisions in the next few budget cycles and the next few budget processes. So when thinking about the budget process, it was very admirably chaired and run in the past few cycles. But we have some bigger problems as we move forward. There are two issues I think could help us do a better job as a part of the conversation. And I may say some controversial things here, so I hope my friend Councilor Zelenka will, I know this is going to be hardest on him not to want to jump in the conversation here, but I apologize in advance for that. I believe that there are two issues to address most presently. One, I believe that the city's budget process could be more representative than it is. We saw some controversy in this year's cycle because of some people feeling that they weren't part enough of the conversation and some very difficult decisions, that they wanted to have more conversation about it amongst the community as a whole and have the community vote. And I believe we could do a better job as council by bringing more people into the budget conversation in future years. We have a process of voting on the council's budget committee members, the volunteer citizens that work on the budget committee, by means of council majority. And you can't get around that no matter what we do with a representative republic like ours. We're going to have a majority votes kind of situation. But I believe it might be worth us considering a model like the counties, where each councilor has the opportunity to name and appoint an individual budget committee member rather than having the council majority choose all the budget committee members. I think in doing that, we might get a more robust selection with, of people on the budget committee, and we might allow for more people to feel as though their voices were heard in the conversation. That's just an idea. I hope to bring that to council, and we'll see what happens. The other issue that we have is certainly more important, and Brittany hit on it too, and I tied it as well. And that is that we as a community want more services from our city than we can afford. We want to buy a lot more stuff than we have the money to pay for. Plain and simple. And we have to face some decisions around that. And I suspect as time moves forward, we have been very creative over time, and I want to take an aside, excuse me, to say that the city manager, whose job it is to prepare all of this, it's a monstrously huge undertaking to prepare and propose a city budget. And she has done a fantastic job, in my opinion, as have other managers before her, but certainly these days it's gotten harder. And I think Sarah did a fantastic job of trying to come up with some creative options. And I want to see her get her due for that hard work. But as we move forward, one of the ways we've been creative over time to say, well, maybe we don't have to do it this way, we can do it differently than we have in the past, is to rely on some of our partners at the state level and the federal level to pay for some things that we as a city think are important. I suspect that as we move forward, those dollars will change, and we've already started to hear that the state funding available for some of the things that we think are important programs in the city may go away, which may make paying for those things with city-related dollars or city general fund dollars more difficult as time goes on. I think that that second item of a problem with our process is that we have no mechanism by which we as a community can say, we don't think the city should be in the business of providing this service anymore, whatever that service is. We don't have a process by which we have a transparent community conversation about what we can't afford to continue to do. And I think we should. I think it's an important part of the conversation. Every year's budget, excuse me, starts with a current service level proposition. In other words, providing the exact same things as we did last year will cost X in the following years. And that's where we come up with the $11.5 million deficit, is saying to provide the same services we have in the past will cost more than we have coming in. And the system that we have set up is controlled by many other folks than just the people in Eugene. The state legislature puts mandates on us, collective bargaining agreements with our employees commit us to expenditures into the future. So, and state law governs the kind of process by which, if there's a dispute in what someone is going to be paid as an employee, that I've forgotten what you call that. I'm having a enforced bargaining process comes from the outside and says the city will do X. So there are, everything that we decide about how much money we spend is not entirely within the scope of what the council and the budget committee does. And now I'll say something I know will infuriate my friend, Councilor Zelenka. But here's a fact. The city of Eugene has never spent less money in a year than it did the year before. Never. All funds in, all dollars, we have always spent more money the next year than we did the year before. And that's inside of an environment where the people who live in our state have decided we're not going to increase taxes that pay for the vast majority of that, more than 3% a year, period. Not going to happen. So that requires us to face some difficult decisions. Should we have a process to say we're not in the business of providing X service anymore? That's something I think we should at least discuss. But it also, I think, leads to the necessity for us to say, okay, if we can't get more money from all of the current taxpayers, how do we bring in new monies from new taxpayers? I think that's a solution we should be looking more. And I'm very hopeful with the technical advisory group that they do a good job of looking at the questions involved in that and how we might address it that way. But I suspect that we're going to see ourselves in difficult decisions about competing priorities for many years to come. And it might do us some good to say, in a creative fashion, what problems have we solved? What issues are no longer ones that need to be addressed by the city of Eugene in the way it is? So I'm hopeful we can do that. I think I've probably still got a couple minutes left, but I don't need to fill them. I would rather have your questions, but like I said, I think those two ideas are what I would like to add to our current process. So I look forward to your questions, and I'll do my best with that.
Thank you, panelists. We'll begin our Q&A quite soon, but first a special thank you to our award-winning public radio station, KLCC, for airing City Club programs on Mondays at 7 p.m. In Eugene, they broadcast on 89.7 FM. For those listening at home or in the car right now, your household is one of several thousand tuning into City Club on KLCC, and we're truly honored to have you. You can also find all recent City Club programs archived at klcc.org, as well as on our YouTube channel and the City Club of Eugene podcast. We'll take a short break before returning for your questions.
Thank you. We're going to shorten the break a little bit so we have some time for questions. So once again, my name is Sandra Bishop, longtime City Club member and coordinator of today's program. And I want to thank our speakers, Eugene City Councilor Mike Clark, Brittany Quick-Warner, CEO and President of the Eugene Chamber of Commerce, and Ty Bruce Zimmerman, who's recently come off of 7 years on the Budget Committee. So we're going to start the questions with a first question from Betty Taylor. Betty had the last question a couple weeks ago. Now she gets the first question. So thank you. Betty's a longtime former City counselor and City Club member. So go ahead, Betty.
Thank you. Now that I have the mic, I'll just say a lot of things, maybe. My name's Betty Taylor, City Club member since 1990, as long as anyone, I think. And first, I want to say something first. I agree with Mike Clark again. We agree sometimes, and that I think every counselor should appoint a budget committee. Actually, I've suggested that in the past, and it was not agreed to, but I think it's a good idea. And I wonder, I have a preliminary question. I wonder if you know that City Club did a study of revenue sources in the past and published it. And I don't know if you've seen that or not, but there were some good ideas. And one idea that I think it was in there, I know that some cities do it, is they find a way to use a part of the lodging tax. And then I want to say, I think that raising the stormwater fee is a big mistake. I think it's true that you pay the stormwater fee on the water that you use to water your lawn. And I don't know if that's still true or not. I think it is. It's on all the water you use. And I would think we would want to encourage people to water their lawns, keep their trees alive, their shrubs alive, and their grass to cut down on fire danger. And I hope, so my question is there a chance you'll repeal that increase in the stormwater fee? Thank you.
Counselor, thank you very much for your question. And thank you for the agreement on the proposed appointment process. I appreciate that. The stormwater fee passed as a temporary 6-year, 2-year budget cycle extension, and it's stormwater is there are so many more other people who could be more articulate about how stormwater is calculated, but the stormwater fee is calculated by the amount of impervious surfaces that a particular location has, how much driveway, how much paved area, how much roof, you know. The impervious surface where water won't soak in when it rains is the manner in which it is, someone is billed for stormwater fee. And so this is the rate for their amount of stormwater assessment, and the rate increase is what's gone up. My understanding of it is about a $3.50 for an average, 1,500 square foot, 3-bedroom, 2-bath house kind of lot for an average homeowner. That it's about $3.50 a month that it will go up for only 6 years, and then it will sunset. But as Brittany has mentioned, I'm hopeful that the Technical Advisory Committee comes up with some better solutions out of the box that we may implement in the future, or that we'll have some more serious conversations.
Thank you. The next question, please.
Hi there. I'm Jacob True. I spoke last week about Cahoots. So yeah, we lost Cahoot services in April. This wasn't a city council or budget committee's decision, but the fact remains that a 30-year-old Cahoot service has been missing for 5 months. Cahoot services have been a third pillar of public safety along with fire, EMS, and police-style services. It's cheaper and more efficient in its service lane than alternatives. Willamette Valley Crisis Care, which consists of former Cahoots workers, stands ready to go out on the streets. Do you support bringing a fully funded Cahoot services back to Eugene as soon as possible? Thank you.
I'll start by saying yes. We talked a bit about how there's sort of 3 ways to close that gap, and one of them is to be more efficient with the money we have in the things that we do. In the general fund, where we have to look for our cuts, about 60% of that is public safety between the police and fire budgets. We know that Cahoots was a deeply efficient, deeply effective program that was a huge boon to our community and that people have been trying to replicate nationwide as a result. And so, yeah, finding ways to be smarter with our money would absolutely include bringing in outside contractors like Brittany proposed, with Willamette Valley Crisis Care being a great example of an opportunity for that.
Sure, I'll weigh in, and I think the answer is yes, but also it kind of depends on what fully funded means and what that looks like, right? So devil's in the details, I guess. I think the point I guess I would make to add to what Ty was saying, because I agree with what he said, is if and when we are looking at potentially contracting out partial services, right? Like that's what we were doing with the Cahoots contract. It behooves us as a community to be paying attention to those contracts and making sure that we are being, you know, transparent in sort of what those services are supposed to be, and that we're holding those contractors accountable to those services that the city is inquiring to receive from them. And so that's part of the challenge. The Cahoots contract ending happened prior to, and not necessarily because of the service cuts, but there was contract issues that I think both the city and Cahoots wanted to be able to resolve, and ultimately ended in that contract sunsetting, and maybe there's another one down the road. But I think it also means that we got to be careful that we're not duplicating services, right? The county now does have an emergency response, crisis response service that we know does not fill all the gaps that Cahoots filled, right? There's definitely gaps that we are still experiencing. But again, we don't want to duplicate what the county is doing now. And so we have to be really careful to make sure we're filling gaps, not duplicating services, and that we're holding contractors accountable to the things that the city wants to contract for.
The short answer is yes, Jacob. I will say that, however, I don't want to get into an argument about the details of the contract and all the specifics about how the service was conducted at the time. There were some issues about how many hours those folks, how many hours Whitebird as an organization could deliver based on the contract that they signed. And I certainly would trust Chief Caven, our fire chief, to tell me, hey, this is the best kind of service for everybody, it looks like this. And I think they're working on what does that look like, how many hours is it, what can Willamette Family provide, and I believe that we should. And I will say that I come at this from someone who, when I was a young fella in my 20s, and before I got married years ago, I lived with buddies in a big house, and one of my roommates was one of the guys that started Cahoots in the 90s and was one of the original guys on the vans. And so he and I have been friends for 30-some years. I know what these guys do out on the street because I used to hear the stories, all the time. And it's incredibly valuable work. And they address problems in ways that almost no one else can. And so it's important that we have that response in our community. It's tough these days to figure out how do you pay for the stuff we want to have within the context of everything we want to have.
Thank you. Go ahead with the next question, please.
Hi, Kelly Johnson, City Club member. Thanks each of you for all of your service that you all do for our community. It's pretty phenomenal. I have a question or curiosity about the prioritization process that you mentioned. We have phenomenal city services here in Eugene, and what I might think of as a priority might not be what you think is a priority. And what I thought was really beautiful about the budget sessions this year was that the community really showed up to talk about what they cared about, Cahoots and the pools and the parks and the library. But can you talk about a little bit of what you see as a process to talk about those priorities as city services with the community at large, like what you envision for that?
It's a tie question.
Yeah, that's a really good question.
This is Ty.
This is Ty, yes. Right, radio. Yeah, that's an excellent question because that part really lives outside of sort of the budget committee level of the process. The budget committee itself is not a policy body. Our job is to take a proposed budget that's been prepared over a year and a half of work, spend a month with it, and send it on to council with what changes we see fit. That's always going to be relatively minimal, and it's not our job to change the policy or change what council's directions are. It's just to find a budget that fits those goals. So that turns into a broader governance issue of how we can engage people before the budget is prepared, before it's presented to us, and make those kinds of changes. And like this is related to also the point where in the budget committee, when on May 21st, we're like hearing testimony about something and we have to on May 28th vote on it, we can't at the committee level consider long-term efficiencies as a solution. We have to go pass a balanced budget in a week. Long-term efficiencies have to be done through the city governance process, through council direction, and through work from staff throughout the 2 years. So finding ways to add touch points to the process where the public isn't only showing up, but in that couple weeks between a proposed budget and passing something, but where the community and our city government is engaging back and forth consistently all the time is something we absolutely need to achieve.
I would only add to that that,
This is Mike Clark.
thank you. I have a voiceover. Wow, that's awesome. I would only add to that, that's why I made the recommendation I did, and that Betty and I seem to agree that each counselor appoint one budget committee member moving forward long-term. And it's because currently I live in City Council Ward 5, North Central Eugene. There are no other Ward 5 residents on the budget committee, none. And there haven't been for a long time. And so the people who live in my area of Eugene feel less represented at times and less an opportunity to weigh in. I suspect, although thinking about it, I don't remember many of them coming to speak and testify there were some. The young lady sitting next to me is a constituent of mine. And she and others involved in the chamber are constituents of mine who came and spoke at budget committee meetings, with the exception of that. Folks who are living in Ward 5 in a neighborhood and, not a lot of them participate as much as other wards, and getting more voices from more parts of our community to be able to be a part of the process, I think cuts down on the controversy when we propose a solution. So, if more people are heard.
Thank you. Go
Hi,
ahead.
Randy Prince. Thank you for your service. Mike, as a city councilor, and Ty, if you were elected, you sit on the governing body of another jurisdiction or agency that spends a lot of money, the Eugene Urban Renewal Agency. And among the monies it spends are tax revenues on a part of what's paid in the downtown urban renewal district, 17 blocks. All the increased value since some time in the past, instead of being split with like other money to county and schools and city, or the city general fund, is actually at your disposal for, well, in the beginning, in 1968, it was a plan, convert to pedestrian and build a big sculpture, and it was renewed. In 1982, the city council was made the governing body of this money, and then it's been renewed again. Now you're kind of operating off of a list of things to do rather than a specific plan for revitalization. I wanted to know the scale of this kind of money that you have control over compared to the shortfalls that we've been talking about. It seems like there's millions of dollars involved and kind of in the same ballpark as the shortfall. I mean, are we choosing between the projects that are supposed to prettify and do all the wonderful things we've seen in downtown versus providing basic police and fire safety throughout the city?
Thank you, sir. Prettify, that's a great word. I'm going to try and use that in the future. The answer to that question is an opinion, and everybody's going to have a different one. Yes, it is a large amount of money. It's a large amount of money over time. It's not in 1 year, millions and millions and tens of millions of dollars. It is over time, but it gives the authority to borrow, and this is the part I agree with. Tax increment financing, if it's used as it's supposed to be used, and as it's intended to be used, it's my opinion that we haven't, as a city, frequently used tax increment financing the way it's designed to be used. The idea of it is to borrow against the future value tomorrow of these assets and taxed locations in order to pay off over time for increasing their value more quickly in the short term. We have, and that's supposed to be done by investing in private property that will grow in value and thus grow the tax base over time and allow for repayment of that debt over that time. I don't believe it's a choice between an expenditure short-term and long-term, because the amount that goes towards financing those tax increment districts is a very small part. It's not a major part. The reason the dollars get so large is because of the time frames. It's not measured over 1 year. It's measured over, dozens of years in order to be able to get to those numbers. I believe that we have received we've done several valuable things with tax increment financing downtown, library, health center, on and on, that have created some public spaces that we're all very proud of, but we've used that for public things outside the realm of what's supposed to be done, increase the value of private things, which increases the tax base as a result.
Yeah, if it's okay, I might win here a little bit too. So Mike's right. I think it does come down a little bit to opinion about how you think those dollars should be spent. But his point about we don't have $50 million sitting in a bank account that we're choosing not to spend on public safety services. Those are dollars that we can ultimately borrow because of how much money we are bringing into that district. So it is less than what our deficit is. It's not like we have $11 million worth of money coming in that we're putting somewhere else instead. What I will say is the city did actually reset incrementally a couple years ago to bring in some of those urban renewal dollars into the general fund. So to your point, they did make a strategic decision to not have as many dollars in that urban renewal district essentially fund to borrow against and to move some into the general fund. So that conversation was had, and they did, I think it was about $1 million this last kind of fiscal budget. So that's a step that the city made. But I think the importance is we have very few, I mentioned it in my comments, we have very few proactive economic development tools in our toolbox. This is one of them. And so the decision to continue or not continue with an urban renewal strategy has to be considered in a much bigger context that is not just the single dollars that would be putting back into the general fund, but it's how are those dollars...
Sorry, Mike, could you pass the mic to her? That other mic isn't working. Sorry about that.
That's okay. Ultimately, we need to make a decision about whether urban renewal stays or goes based on a much bigger context. It's not just those individual dollars that are sitting maybe in a tax increment budget or not. We're talking about what can that bring to us over time to help generate increase in tax revenues across the entire community. Whether folks realize it or not, what is invested in our downtown does truly, in fact, draw businesses and people and development opportunities across the entire community. If we do not have a thriving downtown, it is very difficult to convince a business to come and set up shop even in West Eugene, right? So there's an importance that our downtown holds that brings value to the entire community when it comes to us increasing our economic base as a community. And so there's a bigger picture context that conversation has to be had in, and that is that we have very few economic development tools that we use, and that happens to be one of them.
And then this is Ty, very quick on the numbers piece of it. I did ask this question in my conversations with staff, just in case anyone brought up the idea at the budget committee this year, since we had done a smaller version of it before. And if we had sunset the entire downtown urban renewal district and the entire downtown riverfront urban renewal district, it would have brought in, I think it was somewhere around $2 million in new revenue out of the $11.5 million gap. So we weren't really choosing keep the districts or close the gap. It would have brought in just a very small fraction. Part of that is because if you were to close the urban renewal districts, the city doesn't actually get all of that money anymore. It gets divided among all the taxing districts, so the city gets about 40% of it. So that was the numbers side of it.
Thank you. So I'm so sorry. Do we have time for one more question? Time for one more question with brief answers. So go ahead.
My name is Rebecca Bradvika. I am a Ward 7 constituent represented by Lindsay Leach. I wanted to just check in with Mike Clark about when he referred to enforced bargaining. Perhaps you meant collective bargaining? Okay. But my question, and it's a big one, and so just really broad strokes, because I've never gotten an answer to this question that I keep asking, is what, beyond the budget process, obviously, and thank you, what mechanisms for oversight of the city manager are built into the system?
Oh, this will be a real brief answer.
I could sit down now.
And thank you for that question. Binding arbitration is the words I was looking for when I got stupid before up there and couldn't think of it. Binding arbitration is what we've agreed to. Binding arbitration says a third party gets to decide if the city manager comes to disagreement with a bargaining group of employees about how their pay or benefits are addressed moving forward, right? So it's not entirely within the manager's purview to just decide to pay a group of employees less, because then they're subject to binding arbitration, and that's so it's outside of the manager's purview. There's a certain level of spending that's necessitated because of agreements and because of the state legislature. That's what I was referring to when I said that. So your question, however, was city manager oversight. That guy over there and me and 6 other people are who the city manager reports to directly. The manager works for the city council. The manager is responsible to the majority of council's decision at any given time, period. And I would say I think we do a decent job of oversight, but the model itself gives the manager broad powers. I would ask in a conversational style, what sort of oversight you are referring to? Financial oversight? I mean, how those dollars are spent and audited up. I don't know if this is permitted, but
I'm sorry, we are really running out of time. We need to close the program out so we can talk afterwards.
I will just try and say that the city's budget is audited every year by and has a very robust auditing process to make sure that the city staff have spent the money allocated by council exactly as the elected officials have approved for that to be done. There's an incredibly robust auditing that goes on. So to that degree, there's great accountability for the manager.
There's so much more to say about budgeting. Thank you so much to our guests, and I'm going to turn it back over to Thomas.
Yes, wonderful panel. I want to acknowledge that the gentleman that Councilor Clark referred to a couple times in the room is Councilor Alan Zelenka from Ward 3. So thanks for joining us, Alan. Sorry you didn't get a chance to ask a question. That's all the time we have for today. Please join me once again in thanking Brittany Quick Warner, Councilor Mike Clark, and Ty Pruce Zimmerman. This has been our September 19th, 2025 conversation at the City Club of Eugene. We'll be back here next week at Wow Hall on Friday, September 26th at noon. That program is called Letters from Dachau and features Bob Welch and Clarice Wilsey. It'll be sure to be a great forum, and we're looking forward to seeing you there. Thank you all. Have a wonderful weekend, and we'll see you next time at City Club of Eugene.